So what happens when the trade machine stops spinning? The deal is finalized, and the superstar hears the news while he's sitting on the bench.
In street clothes, no less. I mean, it's an unbelievable scene.
It's almost cinematic. You've got Trae Young, a four-time All-Star, walking off the court mid-game, knowing his time in Atlanta is just over.
Slapping hands with fans on his way to the locker room for the last time?
Yeah. And the piece we're looking at today is a news report covering his trade to the Washington Wizards. But this isn't just a transaction, and that's what we want to focus on.
Exactly. It's a huge dramatic moment, and the writing needs to reflect that right from the jump.
Okay, so let's dive in. The immediate priority for maximizing reader engagement is leveraging the unique, high-drama final act of the Young era.
Right, because the core of this whole story is the timing. It's the fact that this all went down while he was right there, in the arena.
Dressed but not playing, he's like a ghost at his own funeral, almost.
It's a phenomenal premise for a story. But I wonder, if we're really capturing how much power the current opening just leaves on the table.
Go on.
Well, the weakness is that it starts with the formal announcement. Reports, Hawks trade Trae Young. It buries that incredible detail, him leaving the bench in the fourth quarter, deep inside the article.
So you lose all that emotional punch up front.
You do. You completely delay the intrigue. The writer even has that specific image of him slapping hands with fans on the way out.
That small detail is so much more powerful than the bureaucratic news alert. It shifts the whole story from just what happened to how did this feel.
Exactly. So the suggestion is pretty clear. Reorient the whole thing. The headline, the lead paragraphs, they have to emphasize the human element.
You have to lead with your most emotionally charged information if you want to hook a reader.
But let me ask you this. Does that risk sacrificing some journalistic impartiality? If we lead with the spectacle, does it feel more like commentary than news?
That's a fair question, but I don't think so. It's about balancing impact and accuracy. You're not changing the facts, you're just ordering them for maximum effect.
Right.
So a concrete example would be to flip the headline entirely. Instead of the transaction, lead with the drama. Something like, mid-game exit signals end. Trae Young.
Heads to locker room after Wizards trade finalized.
Yeah, and then you follow up immediately with the fact that he was on the bench in street clothes and left with, 30 seconds on the clock?
You establish the emotional stakes before you get into the logistics.
It completely changes the pacing. It goes from being a police report to a real narrative.
It makes the reader feel like they were there, which, leads us right into the next big question. Why? Why did the Hawks do this now?
Exactly, and to robustly support the logic behind this massive trade, the material needs to integrate the controversial performance metrics way earlier in the flow.
Okay, so the piece does a good job listing the assets, McCollum and Kispert, and it mentioned Young's records. He's the Hawks' career leader in assists and threes.
He's a generational offensive talent. No one's debating that.
Right. But the weakness here is that the statistical context, the real why of the trade, is buried at the end.
You're talking about the win-loss numbers.
Yeah, the fact that the Hawks were significantly better without him this season. They were 16-13 when he sat and 2-8 when he played.
Which is just a staggering stat.
It's the whole reason for the trade. But by isolating it at the end, it feels like a footnote. It makes the trade seem almost irrational at first.
I see. So we're talking about a statistical paradox here. You have a superstar whose presence is actively correlating with the team losing.
That tension is the justification. If you don't introduce it early, the reader's just left thinking the Hawks front office is crazy.
Right. So the suggestion is to bring that paradox right up to the front, just after you list the players involved.
Use those conflicting numbers as the central tension. You can honor his individual greatness, but immediately introduce the complication that, forced the team's hand.
Okay, but how do you weave that in without it sounding like you're just, trashing the guy's legacy on his way out the door?
That's all about tone. A really effective way to do it, a concrete example, would be to juxtapose it with praise. His teammate, Mohammed Guy, called him an Atlanta legend.
Okay.
So you use that. You could say something like, while Young departs as an undisputed Atlanta legend, the organization's decision was seemingly driven by a complicated statistical reality.
And then you hit him with the career win percentages, the 49% without him versus 45% with him.
Exactly. It gives context to what Coach Snyder probably couldn't say out loud in his post-game comments. The reader doesn't have to wait 8 paragraphs to get the why.
That's really sharp. It moves the stats from just being numbers to being the actual foundation for the entire decision.
It elevates the piece from just reporting a transaction to analyzing why it was imperative.
And it makes the reader confront that reality that, individual talent doesn't always equal team success.
Which leaves me to ask our listeners, what do you think about that? Can a player be that dominant statistically, but somehow be a net negative for the team's success? It's a fascinating question.
It really is. And that complexity, that idea of individual versus the collective, brings us to our third point, which is all about Young's legacy and where he fits among the game's elite.
Yeah, the report correctly points out he's an offensive machine, one of only 5 players since 2018 in the top 10 for both points and assists.
He's in a category with Jokic, Doncic, Harden, Devin Booker. I mean, that's rarefied air.
But, as the piece notes, he doesn't get the level of respect those players have earned.
So let's build on that. The analysis of Trae Young's place among his elite peers needs to be sharpened to emphasize the specific nature of the challenges he faces and the stakes of this move to Washington.
Okay, I think that's a strong observation already in the piece. So where's the weakness and how it's framed right now?
The weakness is that the idea of a respect gap is a little bit understated. It mentions it, but it doesn't really use the specific evidence in the piece to define why that gap exists.
We have the data to make it razor sharp.
And it's all about his all-star history.
You're talking about the fact that 2 of his 4 nods were voted in, but the other 2 were injury replacements added by the commissioner.
That detail is the narrative anchor for this whole legacy discussion. So the suggestion is to use that specific detail, the voting versus the replacement status, to define what that respect gap actually is.
It suggests he hasn't earned that sort of unquestioned endorsement from his peers and from coaches, not like a Jokic or a Doncic has.
Despite having the stats of an inner circle superstar. It's fascinating. I mean, if you're a top 5 statistical player over that whole period, why do you need to be an injury replacement half the time?
That specific detail is the tension of his career right now. It's the feeling that he's always on the outside looking in, having to prove he belongs.
Absolutely. And this is where you can frame his new chapter in Washington. His eligibility for that 3-year extension becomes his ultimate opportunity.
It's not just about a new contract. It's a proving ground to finally secure a legacy on par with those peers. Jokic's rings, Harden on the 75th anniversary team, Booker's gold medals. The stakes are huge.
So how do we tie that specific voting history to the financial stakes? Because that extension, that potential $49 million option, that's the real consequence here.
The concrete way to do it is to explicitly link the lack of respect to those replacement nods, right when you're comparing him to his peers.
So don't just state it as a fact. Use it as a jumping-off point.
Exactly. You turn it into a question for the reader. Ask them, how does this unique detail, being a top statistical player but needing replacement nods, inform the stakes of his potential extension with the Wizards?
Is this the chapter where he finally earns that universal respect?
Right. It transforms a kind of dry contract detail into the central personal conflict of the entire story.
It makes the trade not just a roster move, but a truly career-defining moment where he's chasing validation, not just wins.
And it frames this as a necessary move. The narrative becomes that this trade wasn't just inevitable, it was essential for his career to move forward.
That's a fantastic structural change. You make the reader immediately invested in what happens to him in Washington 2 or 3 years from now.
You have to maximize the impact. Every single piece of information should be driving the narrative, not just confirming the facts.
This has been great. Okay, so to recap, the 3 key actionable points for strengthening this report.
Let's do it.
First, completely refocus the opening. You have to lead with that dramatic mid-game walk-off to hook the reader immediately.
Second, integrate those counterintuitive win-loss stats much earlier. Use that data as the core tension to justify the trade's logic right away.
And third, use the specific detail of his all-star replacement nods to sharpen the narrative about his quest for respect and link that directly to the huge financial stakes of his future in Washington.
Those changes will take this from a good news report to really compelling, high-stakes storytelling.
Absolutely. So we encourage you to implement these changes and please submit your revised work back for a follow-up. We'd love to see it. In the meantime, we'll leave our listeners with a question. Who do you think has a greater immediate impact on the Hawks? CJ McCollum or Corey Kispert?
Oh, that's a good one.
Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'll see you next time.